ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for joining me for what is a very special broadcast right here today on the Kev Baker Show. And today's guest is a man that needs little to no introduction. If it hadn't been for the work of today's guest, then there really is a good chance I wouldn't be here speaking to you today about the topics which I do. And today's guest first spoke out publicly about his personal awakening around 30 years ago on The Wogan Show, and everybody laughed. However, those same people today, they ain't laughing so much. And from the theatre of the left-right political paradigm, through problem, reaction, solution, to the very nature of how reality works, David Icke has broken the illusion that so many of us, myself included, used to live in. And that's what makes him dangerous, very dangerous, to the point where recently he was banned from speaking on his global tour over in Australia. Now, I was lucky enough to go and see today's guest when he was in Glasgow, and I know that his message is the kind of thing that really worries the people that control this planet. And like I say, no longer do they laugh at him. In fact, now they don't even debate him. They just try to silence him. So his new film, Renegade, a story about his life, is going to be coming out imminently. And he's here today, and nobody can stop him talking on Truth Frequency Radio, because this is where silence is consent. And it's a great honour to finally welcome David Icke to the Kev Baker Show. David, it's absolutely amazing. I almost have to pinch myself to have you here with me, sir.
Oh, no, I'm just a bloke trying to do his best, mate. How are you, Kev? All right?
I'm doing absolutely fine, David. And like I said there in the introduction, for myself and so many others, you know, I really do think that it would be harder for the likes of me and other people out there to be doing what we're doing today. So I have to thank you, you know, for almost kind of leading the way like a pioneer for all of us that was to come after you. And what's it like now, you know, looking back at the world and things you were predicting back in the 90s really coming to fruition today?
Well, it's a different life I live now. Been for a long time, from when I had my own colossal awakening, if you like, to the program, which is what human life basically is, in 1990 and 91. It was a life lived to the sound of both distant and close up, often laughter and dismissal and ridicule of historic levels. Today, I've gone from being mad, although some people still think that, who don't look at what I've said against what's actually happened since. But overwhelmingly, I've gone in terms of opposition, if you like, pushback, from being mad to being dangerous. It's been an almost seamless transition. To pinch myself. Well, I was mad, was I? And now I'm dangerous. Well, when did that happen? Well, of course, when it happened was the point that the system saw that what I was saying was no longer being ridiculed and dismissed on the scale that it was before, and increasingly less and less all the time. But people were listening. And I think the main reason for that, Kev, is that what I said over the last 30 years has happened or is happening. And we've reached that point where what has been manipulated into place, the direction the world has been manipulated into, which is more and more destruction of freedom, privacy, and the Orwellian state in all its forms, has reached the point where it's got to manifest what it's been planning to transform society in the way that it wants. And therefore, suddenly, it's no longer sometime over the rainbow. It's no longer this is going to come. People can now see it. It's happening. It's not a prediction. It's an experience. And so people have looked at what I've been saying all these years and looking at what is happening now, and that credibility connection has got more and more people worldwide. I mean, this is a worldwide phenomenon, to say, well, what the hell else is this guy saying that we ought to be looking at? And at that point, when that started to happen, that's when the movement really started to ban my public meetings. I tell you, I was on talk radio, the national talk radio station out of London, for, what would it be, about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month, talking about Renegade, the new film that's just a few days from coming out. And there were complaints to the station by an organization called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, that they had me on to talk about a film, and that it was disgusting that I was allowed to go on. So what you're looking at there is a organization that claims to be about stopping anti-Semitism, that complained to a national radio station about an interview with me that did not, A, mention Jewish people, and B, was about a film that does not mention Jewish people. So what tells you something very clear, that the efforts to silence me using the ludicrous slur of anti-Semitism is not about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's not. It's a protection racket to stop legitimate exposure and investigation of the activities of the far-right regime in Israel. But more than that, it's about, and people might ask organizations like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, hold on, mate, why are you trying to silence him when he's exposing a agenda, or he's talking about subjects that don't even mention Jewish people? And if the answer was truthful, it's because we want to stop all exposure of what he's saying, and that actually the whole thing about anti-Semitism is just an excuse to shut him up about everything. So we have a situation, you mentioned Australia, where basically one man, a guy called Devere Abramovich, who runs a man and a dog organization called the Anti-Defamation Commission. And of course, all these organizations like the Anti-Defamation Commission, the Anti-Defamation League in America, are classic Orwellian inversions, because what they do is go around defaming people by trying to use the slur of anti-Semitism to silence people who are exposing legitimate facts to the public. And this has ramped up and ramped up to the point now where clearly I am, it's a challenge to even speak in public these days.
Well, I was saying to you before the show that I was lucky enough to come and see you in Glasgow. And I say lucky because, you know, it was almost cloak and dagger, as you know, David. Up until 24 hours beforehand, we were waiting to find out where it would be. And then when I got there, you know, I came away from it, absolutely amazing stuff. However, I'm thinking to myself, how can anyone realistically ask for that to be banned? Because you're not going after a religious group. You're just naming the players in the game. And it's on them that they're the ones committing the crimes, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. This is the point. This is why it's a protection racket and nothing to do with protecting Jewish people from discrimination. Because it doesn't matter how much proof you have that person A is doing this or person B is doing that. If they're Chinese, that's fine. If they're French, that's fine. But if they happen to be Jewish, that's not fine. And what is that except a form of discrimination? See, you know, having seen my talk in Glasgow, that I am actually of a philosophy in terms of the nature of reality, the nature of the true I, that is the most fundamentally unracist, undiscriminatory philosophy you could ever come up with. Because what I'm saying is that the true I is a state of awareness. We are just awareness, a state of being aware. And that ultimately we are all points of attention within one infinite state of awareness, consciousness. And that all the labels that people give themselves and are told to give themselves, labels of race, of religion, of culture, of sexuality, are merely transitory and incredibly short experiences for that state of awareness, which is just experiencing this tiny band of frequencies we call the world. And so I'm saying that it's the labels and it's the self-identity with the labels and the divide and rule that's possible when people identify with labels, the I am ours, as I call them, that is the very foundation of human discord and human conflict and human injustice. Because if we self-identified with what I say is the true I, whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or, I don't know, a Christian from the southern states of America, wherever, whether you're an atheist, whether you're this color or that color, or this income bracket or that income bracket, doesn't matter. It's just an experience, and a very transitory and short one, like I say. What you are is the consciousness, the awareness that's actually having the experience. And if we all kind of looked at ourselves as that state of awareness and the labels as just an experience, then a heck of a lot, ultimately all the discord and conflict between us would disappear. Because, you know, when people go on a stage and they play different parts in a play or a movie, they know when they're playing those parts that they are acting. It's just an experience. So one actor might play a part that's incredibly antagonistic against another actor or actress in the play. But when they get back to the dressing room, they don't continue with the part. They don't continue to live the label. They sit down and have a beer or something, because it was just an experience, if you like. And this is just a transitory, almost like a play. I mean, what's that Shakespeare play line about all the world is a stage and we are just the players? So it's because people get obsessed with labels, both their own and the labels of others, and seek therefore to impose their labels on everyone else. I mean, what Christians are trying to get other people to be Christian. Muslims are trying to get other people to be Muslim often.
And David, look how just recently they're trying to manipulate things even greater at that point, because, you know, they're giving everyone an identity in this play that we're living out here on the planet. They're dividing even the sexes. Used to be man and woman. Now we've got how many genders? You know, so they're giving everyone, they're trying to build these boxes so that everyone can fit in somewhere nicely. But all that does is allows them to rig the game, and it divides us even further.
Absolutely right. You remember in the Glasgow talk, I talked about quite early on about how we have gone from labels that we used to have to now micro labels. The labels are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. So now, as you rightly say, with the sexes, we now have the female sex and the male sex broken down into IMRs. We have the whole transgender thing. And the labels are getting smaller. And what does that mean? It means there is more and more potential for more and more divide and rule at the micro level of self-identity. Because the problem is self-identity. We self-identified with being the consciousness having the experience. You see the world and everyone else in a certain way. You self-identify with being the label, whatever it is, and suddenly you see yourself and other people in a totally different way. And if you take you take the whole basic premise of what I'm saying in regard to this. I have a simple philosophy on life. Do what you like so long as you don't impose it on anyone else. If you're going down the wrong road, experience will point that out to you eventually. But do what you like so long as you don't impose it on anyone else. And then people's response to that is, well, what about murder, doing what you like? Well, actually, that murder would actually be imposing your will on someone else. But this imposing your will, which people then call freedom and diversity, when it's the absolute opposite. It's destroying diversity. This imposing your will now, you see everywhere. So if someone feels they're in the wrong body and their gender is not the gender they feel they should be, then I say good luck to you. It's your body, it's your life. You decide what you do with it. And if you need some help with it, well, society should give you that help, like anyone else. But that's different, Kev, from then imposing your view of life and your view of sexuality upon everyone else, which is what is happening. And this is what I'm challenging. Not people's right to different lifestyles. I'm all for diversity. What a boring world it would be if everyone was the same. But what is happening, ironically, in this inverted world that we live in, is in the name of diversity, diversity is being destroyed. Because if you're not singing from the hymn sheet of the diversity industry, then you have to be silenced.
We even see this now within LGBTQP, wherever it's going, because you would think that they were all one group, but like you predicted, eventually they would turn on each other.
They turn on each other, yeah. I said that a long time ago, that's what's going to happen. Because they do turn on each other, and not least because they're meant to turn on each other. Because like I said earlier, the more groups you have, the more potential you have for divide and rule. And this is an interesting area, Kev. What we're looking at is classic Marxism. See, Karl Marx was not the people's friend. He wasn't man of the people. He was the banker's boy. And when you look at Marxism, you see, what the few need to control everyone else is centralization of power. Now, you can do it the way the 1% do it, whereby you hoard all the wealth and thus all the power and thus all the decision making. You manipulate politicians to constantly centralize power, so fewer and fewer are deciding what happens to more and more, which is what the European Union's all about. Or you can do it another way. You can sell as people's government a centralized hierarchical tyranny of the kind we saw in the Soviet Union under Stalinism, etc., and communism, or in China, etc. And you don't forget that the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution were promoted as a people's revolution. But what tends to happen every time, virtually, is the people then become controlled by a tyranny that takes over as a result of this illusory people's revolution. And the way that Marxism works is by playing groups off against each other. So you had the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and all this stuff. Let's play them off against each other to transform society. This is what Marxism does. This is what its foundation is. It's playing groups off against each other. Now, what's happened now is this vast explosion of groups and micro groups is classic Marxism. And they're being played off against each other to transform society. But this explains something very significant, I would suggest. When you have the haves put into conflict with the have-nots, the power put into conflict with the oppressed, or at least in theory, then your billionaires and your people claiming to fight for social justice are in opposition to each other, right? That's the way it works. That's how Marxism works to change society. And then you have a revolution and the haves end up in power. But what's happened now is that the self-identity Marxism groups, where everything is about self-identity. It's why you're seeing, race seen everywhere. I mean, you look at an anti-racist and you're looking at someone who is, or an anti-racist activist, not people in general, and you're looking at someone who's absolutely obsessed with race. They see it everywhere. I don't see race everywhere. I see consciousness having experiences in different bodies, and ironically, I'm supposed to be the person against diversity, which is kind of extraordinary.
And we've even got to the stage where white people in the street are almost crying because of their white guilt, because of things that have happened hundreds of years ago.
Exactly, because that's reverse racism, and reverse racism includes the word racism. So it's racism. Reverse racism is not how you end racism. Ending racism is how you end racism, by not seeing people for their race, but seeing people for their individual behavior. But I want to come back to that. But let's finish this point on Marxism, because the groupings that are being played off against each other in if you like, today's Marxism are self-identity groups instead of income bracket groups. This is why now you have this extraordinary alliance between so-called progressives and social justice warriors and multi-billionaires like George Soros and the multi-billionaires that run the social media and other internet corporations. They are in alliance with each other. And when someone's banned from the internet for saying something the progressives don't like, the old truly liberal left that I grew up with would have been shouting from the rooftops, this is totalitarianism. What are you doing? It's the billionaires trying to impose their will on the population again. But not today. The social justice warriors cheer when the billionaires censor people who are saying something they don't agree with. And it's because now it's self-identity group Marxism rather than income bracket Marxism that this alliance between self-identity groups and billionaires and so-called left groups and billionaires has been possible. Because as long as the billionaires are supporting the self-identity group agenda, then they're all mates. And it comes to something when you expose the unbelievable level of global manipulation of someone like George Soros and others. And the social justice warriors run to their defense and call for you to be silenced because you shouldn't be saying that against nice Mr. Soros, who is one of the great global manipulators on behalf of people much more powerful than him, of course, but he's still a very significant player at the level of it, of where it's actually happening. So this is what's going on. We're looking at Marxism, and I found it interesting the other day. I think it was a Conservative MP put something on social media about the fact that we were experiencing cultural Marxism, and we are self-identity Marxism. But then the anti-Semitism industry kicked in, immediately reacted, and said that this was an anti-Semitic trope, that she was talking about cultural Marxism and she should never use the term again. You know, so this whole anti-Semitism industry, like I say, is not about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. If you're a Jewish person and you speak out against Israel, you get worse treatment from this crowd than someone who's not Jewish. So it's not about Jewish people. It's about silencing exposure, not just of Israel, but of things that aren't, on the face of it, anything to do with Israel, which is kind of an interesting point that people ought to ponder on and ask why.
And of course, David, you've been exposing these characters for years now, and both of us, you in particular, you've really mastered the use of social media with your really kind of impactful memes, infographics, stuff like that. And we can see, just like you're saying there, people screaming for people like you, people like Alex Jones to be silenced on the internet. And you can see almost the internet changing, or at least people think the internet's changing, right? Because this is the way that it was always designed to end up like in the first place, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the internet is a colossal global Trojan horse. The internet could be fantastic and it could be a great boon to humanity. And in many ways, it has been up to recent times, in the sense that it allowed discourse between people uncensored, where people could say what they like and express their opinions. But that was only allowed by those that created the internet, which was basically the organizations like DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon. That's who introduced the internet, because of course it's based on military technology. And the idea was to let the fishing line go out by allowing the free flow of discourse and information. I mean, I'm sure they were, spitting blood while it was happening, because it's the last thing they wanted, but they had to do it, because if they'd have created a censored internet, as they increasingly are now by the day, then it wouldn't have got the traction it did, and it wouldn't now be the absolute central pillar, as it is, of human society, which what the plan all along was. And once it became that central pillar and it was irreversible, the whole of society now revolves around the internet. Even driving your car, you're connected to the internet. Then they reached a point, which obviously we're there now, where they felt confident enough to start introducing the internet that it was planned to be all along. And that's when the censorship kicked in. You also had your Facebooks and your Twitters and all these other people who also Google and YouTube, owned by Google, or Google's parent company now, Alphabet. And they ran uncensored platforms in this same period that the internet was basically uncensored. And they were being promoted and funded to become the near monopolies of their particular area of the internet. And of course, if they'd have censored up to that point of near monopoly, then people would not have got involved with them on the scale that they have. So they played the same game, because ultimately these organizations are controlled by the same people that control the internet and created the internet. And so once the point was reached where they thought we're basically monopolies now, so there's no going back, and we have the financial power to crush anyone who tries to create a platform to challenge us, which is what they do, then we can now start creating our organizations, Google, YouTube, Facebook, to be what they were planned to be all along, which is now dictating what people see and hear. Because the whole goal of all this, or at least one fundamental goal of it, there are many, is to create a situation where no one ever sees or hears anything in the public arena that this system doesn't want them to see and hear. Everything else is censored. They never hear it. And this is fundamental. I mean, it's beyond fundamental, because human behavior, human response comes from perception, human perception. People do things or don't do things, act or don't act, because of their perception of the situation. And perceptions of everything come from information received. So therefore, if you control the information and you censor information that would get people to look at it at everything in a different way to what you want them to, then you are also, through creation or control of information, you are dictating their perceptions, and from their perceptions, you're dictating their behavior. It's total control. And this is what we're looking at now, where things that challenge the official narrative, i.e. what the system wants you to believe, are now being censored ever more blatantly and ever more in ever greater extremes. And this is why it's happening. And so you've seen people who up to this point have been left alone to just communicate what they choose to communicate, now disappearing from the internet. And that's all been planned all along.
And we'd got to the stage, David, it was really encouraging. You could see this awakening, for lack of a better term, really going around the world. And yourself and Alex Jones, you know, two people that really woke me up to the left-right paradigm. And just when we were starting to show people what an illusion it was, that there is no choice, the agenda remains the same, along comes Donald Trump. What the hell happened to people, David? They just forgot everything they knew in an instant.
Yeah, Alex did, unfortunately. I don't think it is the role of the alternative media to support political philosophies, or to support political parties, or to support individual politicians. It's to give people information from which they come to their own conclusions about political parties and politics in general. The job of the alternative media, for me, is to point out with factual information how the system is rigged and how the multi-party system is basically an illusion, because in the end, the same force is in power, whichever color rosette is currently officially in power. So when you look, for instance, at the extraordinary amounts of money that it takes to run to get the presidential nomination in your own party, never mind run for president itself, the people that attract that money, which comes from what? The billionaires and the 1%, are those that are acceptable to the source of the money. So you have someone like Sheldon Adelson, who is a Las Vegas casino multi-billionaire and owns media in Israel, etc., who is Trump's biggest funder. Sheldon Adelson doesn't care about America, doesn't care about people sleeping in tents in increasing numbers across America. He cares about advancing his agenda by controlling those in official power. So the reason I suggest that the great chunks, not all of it, great chunks of the alternative media, particularly in America, kind of completely forgot everything they've been telling everyone else with regard to Trump, is because they still are stuck in the idea that politics is going to change anything. Politics is there to stop anything changing in a positive way for humanity in general. That's why it's there. And the agenda of Trump, there were a number, but this is one of them, was, and I said this before he was elected, not after, was to create a situation in America which has been monumentally achieved, of basically splitting the country into two and creating, if not yet a literal physical civil war, then at least an ideological civil war is going on. America is as divided as it's possibly ever been, but certainly way up there in terms of the divisions of America over the period of America's history. Because you had, and if you look at Marxism again, and you look at the way its methods of manipulation over many years, one of its methods is to personalize politics, to get it down, if you can, to the focus upon one individual being the villain. And if you focus on one individual, you lose touch with the wider web, not only that's connected to that individual, but actually controls that individual. Because by focusing on the individual, you're saying he or she is the one with the power. Trump's not the one with the power at all. But because he is a bombastic man, a very narcissistic man, and not the brightest, I would suggest, but believes he is, you can get the impression from the way he acts and the way he talks that he's in control and he's making the decisions. He's not. The same cabal that controlled Boy George Bush, the time of 9/11 and the Iraqi war, are the same cabal that are controlling Trump. John Bolton, his national security advisor, who's driving this conflict agenda with Iran and China and North Korea and Venezuela, is from the same cabal that was behind Boy George Bush, that led to the invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq. The same cabal, a bit further in the background, but still with the same basic influence, that was behind Barack Obama when he supported the bombing of Libya with its catastrophic ongoing consequences, the civil war being started by a proxy US EU army in Syria. And the same cabal is now driving on to create conflict in these other countries today, not least Iran. So when you see how the structure works, and you see how the one-party state works while putting two or more faces to the public to give them the illusion of choice, then you could see, as Trump was being brought forward, that he wasn't a maverick bucking the system. He was a puppet of the system, and that's exactly how it's turned out. But great chunks of the alternative media in America fell for it and gave great support to Trump, were very significant in his victory, I would say, if you look at his natural constituency, and he's nothing more than the latest puppet in a great long line of puppets who we're told to believe are in charge of America. It's the structure of the system and how it works we should be concentrating on, and if we do that, then we'll see that the messiahs like Trump are actually just little boys in short trousers being told what to do by a force in the shadows.
Absolutely. And I think, Boris Johnson, a babbling idiot for sure, but I think he's going to be used for a similar reason, David. He's somebody that we can focus on the character again. And, while we focus on him, the agenda will move on. But I'm very conscious that we're, kind of running out of time. I want to ask you about your new film. But before I ask you about that, you were up here in Glasgow, and of course Glasgow, it's quite important in the UK because us residents here, we didn't know we had entered a competition, but we won the right to be the UK's first smart city. How Orwellian is that, David? You know, but
Oh, congratulations, Kev.
yeah.
I hope you'll be very happy to get
Oh,
that.
oh, absolutely. And not even that. Out of the 28 million that we, air quotes, won, I think 20 million went to an Israeli security firm called NICE. And they're the ones that are going to be surveilling all of our cameras using their AI, their algorithms to control us all. And this 5G system, these smart cities, David, this is something that you predicted way, way, way back in the day. And here I am now, ground zero, living in one.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have quite a lot to say in the second half of this year about the Israel connection to the smart grid. Not the Israel connection in terms of its people, but the Israel connection in terms of the cabal that runs Israel. So watch for that in the second half of the year. But the smart cities are something that have been planned for a very long time. You see, I tell you, I do understand it, Kev. I do understand it. I really do. But the biggest problem that people have with grasping the nature of what's happening and what is planned to happen is, well, basically naivety, which goes, they would never do that. And not seeing, and I kind of emphasize again, I do understand why, but not seeing the absolute magnitude of what we're looking at. You see, Trump or no Trump, Theresa May or no Theresa May, Boris Johnson or no Boris Johnson, is simply looking at the world down the wrong end of a telescope. That's all it is. It's a diversion to keep people occupied, fighting among themselves. And while people do that, and that's their focus, the real agenda goes on unchallenged. And we are looking, I mean, I'll keep it as short and simple as I can, but basically, and my last book, I've just finished another one, which is going to come out in September. You know, I mean, if people think I've been demonized up to this point, wait till that comes out. Anyway, the last book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, goes into this in part of the book in great detail. What's being created is a web of frequencies around the planet. This is why you're seeing in the last few days the stories of Elon Musk putting up all these satellites to beam the internet back at the Earth. They want a situation. I've been writing and talking about this for such a long time. As I mentioned it, of course, in the Glasgow talk. They want a situation whereby there's not one single inch of planet Earth where microwave radiation Wi-Fi, if you like, is not everywhere. So there is no escape. Gobi Desert, no escape. Well, you know, people say, well, yeah, well, they can't put microwave masts up in the Gobi Desert. No, they don't have to, mate. They beam them from the sky, beam them from space. They're talking about 20,000 satellites going up. That's probably an underestimate. Beaming Wi-Fi, the internet, back at the planet, back at humans. And the idea is that the whole system, what's known as the smart grid, which involves this Wi-Fi, the satellites, the internet, smartphones. I mean, look at everything now that has the word smart in front of it. Where did that come from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. Anything with smart in front of it, everything from a smartphone to a smart TV to a smart car to smart motorways, which are lethal, to smart borders, whatever. It's all part of the same smart grid. And smart cities are designed to be run eventually completely by artificial intelligence and that which controls artificial intelligence, including connecting AI to the human brain and the human mind. So AI becomes the human mind. The smart city thing is only where it is now. It's not where it's meant to end. It's meant to end up in a global grid and a city grid, if you live in these smart cities, whereby everything's controlled by AI, not by humans, by AI. And this is where smart cars are coming in, and smart vehicles, and smart trains.
Yeah,
It's
they call it the Internet of Things, but it's more the Internet of everything, and we're encapsulated into that. And we're almost going to be like the biological devices, the final piece of that jigsaw to fit into this AI system, right?
Yeah, and in the end, not even biological, because another longer term, but not as long as people think or would think, is the replacement of the biological human with the synthetic human. This is what all these synthetic robots being developed now are all about, which are looking closer and closer like humans, because this radiation environment, not least with 5G, which is such a massive and cumulatively lethal stepping up for the impact upon humans physically and psychologically. This ramping up of these electromagnetic frequencies is going to reach a point eventually in the grid that they want to create, whereby the biological human will not be able to survive it. 5G is going to, and I mean, let's not beat about the bush. We're past the point of pussyfooting around here. 5G is going to end the life of enormous numbers of people for many and various reasons, because the human body is basically an energetic electromagnetic information field. And anything that disturbs the balance, the coherence, and the communication within that electromagnetic information field is going to have devastating effects on that field, which is going to have devastating effects on health. Because we talk about health, and what is health? It's basically balance, everything in balance. We talk about dis-ease, disease. What is that? It's dis-ease, it's imbalance. And these technologically generated frequencies now are fundamentally imbalancing the human information energetic field, which is having increasing expressions in physical and psychological health. Excuse me. And so the 5G, which is a massive ramping up in terms of power and impact, is going to increase this. And this is why 5G is being rolled out without any independent testing, funded by government or funded by the industry. The industry have admitted that. And those scientists that have done research into it are saying that it is potentially catastrophic for human society, human health, and I keep emphasizing human psychology. Let us not forget the brain communicates electrically, and anything that disturbs that electrical communication is going to have psychological impacts. There are many, many reasons for this, but or for why we're having this explosion of psychological problems in people, psychological problems in kids, the increase in suicide of kids, the dramatic increase in Alzheimer's and all these things. There are other reasons that are driving that as well. But one of them is the impact of these frequencies on the human mind. And 5G is, like I say, a massive upgrade, if you can call the word upgrade, downgrade in its impact. And so, you know, I've not given my life to this because it's a bit of a laugh or something to do. I've done it because of after 30 years of full-time research in something like 60 odd countries, what I've seen is the plan, and the plan's now becoming more and more visible, is so horrific that what else would you do but do everything you could to alert people of it? And this is another problem. And again, I understand it. It's not appreciating the scale of pure, undiluted evil that we're dealing with, that is ultimately behind this, in the shadows, operating from the shadows. It makes psychopaths look like Mary Poppins, and it has no empathy, and therefore it has no emotional consequences for anything it does. And so there are no empathetic limits to what it will do to people, children, anybody, couldn't care less. I'm just reading a book at the moment by an American doctor about vaccines. And I've been challenging vaccines for 30 years. But when you read this guy's book, breaking it down from a doctor's point of view, I mean, any parent that reads it would never have their child vaccinated. It's extraordinary what we are allowing to happen to our children purely through ignorance. The repetition of how things are, vaccines protect children. They don't. The opposite is the truth. And this is why, again, you're now having people who are putting out information challenging the official version of vaccines are being shut down by social media and these internet giants. You know, when I was banned from Australia, one of the reasons that the Australian immigration minister, who did it off his own bat on the say-so of this guy, Devere Abramovich, one of the reasons I was banned from Australia was my views on vaccines. So we're now in a situation where you can, when you're a pharmaceutical giant who is making billions of dollars a year from vaccines, you can claim what you like about vaccines. In fact, you can keep the American television stations going with your drug adverts, no problem. Say what you like. But a concerned parent who starts an organization to tell the story of their vaccine damaged child and the background to what vaccines are doing, you have to be shut down. And there was a Scottish Labour MP recently who actually is reported as saying anyway that not having your child vaccinated should be a criminal offence. I mean, you know, that is so extreme. It is just beyond my imagination that you can enforce vaccines by the criminal law when the truth about vaccines is that by mandating vaccines, you are condemning a significant number of children either to death or to being brain damaged or health damaged for life. Now, this is not lunatic David Icke pulling this out of the ether. I'm quoting the figures. Kids are damaged for life in terms of their health. They're brain damaged. Some of them die as a result of their reaction to vaccines. And therefore, if you mandate them, a significant number of those who are vaccinated because they're mandatory, who weren't vaccinated before, are going to be condemned to die and to have health or brain damage for life. So that Scottish MP ought to find himself a mirror and have a little chat. And the thing is that the Labour Party and the so-called left in politics has become the absolute public relations enforcers for the very system those parties were originally just set up to challenge. If Keir Hardie saw today's Labour Party and today's Scottish National Party, he wouldn't turn in his grave, he would spin in it.
You're absolutely correct, David. And I know we're running out of time. And of course, you know, you've been almost like the OG, the original gangster in this truth movement, for lack of a better term, you know, for all these years now. And finally, you know, at long last, in my opinion, you're getting a film made about your life. Renegade comes out in the next week or so. Tell us a little bit about that before I let you go, sir.
Okay, mate. Renegade is available through davidicke.com on June the 4th. I was approached by a film making company in America, not because they supported what I do, but because they thought my story was interesting, would make a good film. And they followed me around, fly on the wall. I think we went to about 4 countries, and America and both coasts, Britain, Croatia, Ireland. And they came to talks. They, followed me around in my everyday life. And I had nothing to do with the editing at all. They edited it based on the information and what they thought would make a good film. And it's about an hour and 40 minutes long. We've had premieres of it in London and New York and Amsterdam and I think Scotland. It's gone down a storm. I mean, more than my wildest dreams, really. And it's a story about my life. But if it was just a story about my life, well, okay. But that's not the way I operate. What I wanted and agreed to was a story about my life, yes, but a story about my work. So within the theme of what's happened to me is an absolute phenomenal amount of information about the world and how it's really controlled. And again, even though the film doesn't mention Jewish people, you're going to have the anti-Semitism industry trying to do everything they can to undermine it. In fact, they already have in Los Angeles, where the producer of the film in America arranged for a showing of it at an old movie theater in Santa Monica, Los Angeles, called Aero, the Aero Theater, which is owned by a company which involves a number of famous American actors and directors, called American Cinematique. And we arranged for the showing, or people arranged for the showing, and I was over there. And it was due to start about 6:30. People were due to arrive. And we were driving to the theater for a meeting there at 4 o'clock to do a technical run through, make sure everything was working. At 5 minutes to 4, while we're still in the car getting there, literally maybe 2 blocks away, the producer gets a call in the back of the vehicle, and he's told it's off, it's cancelled. And because it was about me. Well, they knew it was about me before, so obviously someone's had a word that day, and suddenly it wasn't me. They never told me it was about David Icke. Oh, yeah, okay, usually get that. But the most sinister part of it, because the guy who called to say all this, it was a woman as well, but the guy then took the phone, was screaming down the phone hysterically, So much so that I'm in the front seat, the producer's at the back, he's got his phone to his ear, and I can hear every word clear what this guy's shouting. And the conversation at one point went like this. Is this a film about David Icke? Well, yeah, says the producer. Does it put him in a good light? Well, yeah, he comes across well in it. Yeah, well, that was the end of it. So if this film had have demonized me, then the showing, the premiere, would have gone ahead. And of course, people turned up because we were massive Los Angeles rush hour traffic jams away from getting back to our hotel that we could let people know. But of course, the people who owned the theater couldn't care less, because their thought processes, and I've come across this all over the world. David Icke is evil, therefore anyone that wants to see his film must be evil, therefore it doesn't matter how we treat them. That's how it goes. And these people have the nerve then to talk about values and the fact that they're progressive. And progressive, which is the new word for the hijacked left, is nothing to do with the liberal left that I grew up with, which went on protest marches demanding freedom of speech. It's now the Soros left, the billionaire left, that goes on protest marches demanding the free speech is taken away. So the second half of this year is going to be interesting, and you'll see why eventually. The time's come that we have to speak our truth and keep nothing back. Because if we don't, then the vehicles to speak that truth will be gone.
Absolutely. And of course, we're on tfrlive.com here, where silence is consent. I urge you all to check out David's website. You can get a hold of his book as well. I've got it here, Everything You Need to Know, But I've Never Been Told. What an amazing piece of work. Try and catch Renegade, and hopefully, David, we'll have you back on sometime in the near future, because the way the world's going, there's always more for us to sit and talk about.
Well, we should talk again in September, October, and you'll see why then.
Oh, absolutely. So thank you for everything you've done, David, and long may you continue to do what you do. Thank you, sir.
Been a pleasure, Kev. Thanks very much.